an editor of a very large newspaper said to me one day, "Congressman, face it, the news is biased." And I said, "How is that possible?" And he said, "Just know they're all biased." Is that true? Michael, is all the media biased?
Well, it depends what you mean by bias. I think, in my experience, for 7 years before I went to Capitol Hill, I was a TV producer for MSNBC, for Chris Matthews, on a show called Hardball. I think the bias in media is not so much ideological. Sure, you have your MSNBC, which leans left, you have your Fox News, which leans right, and you have CNN trying to build something somewhere in the middle. But I think the bias is actually more towards conflict. I think, this goes back to the early 80s, actually to local media. Believe it or not, Rudy Giuliani's second wife, sorry, I get them confused, second wife, Donna Hanover, was a legendary local news reporter in Miami at a station called WSVN, and they're still around today, and they invented the phrase, "If it bleeds, it leads." And Roger Ailes at Fox did an incredible job of bringing conflict into national politics and creating villains and heroes. And one of his big, I would say, mantras was that people who are watching cable news, people don't want to be informed, they want to feel informed. And I think that kind of decision-making that went into their program was designed to, tug at emotional hearts or make people angry. But I think the other networks followed suit and saw the successful direction Fox was going in. And I think, so the answer to your question is, my feeling about bias is that there is bias towards conflict and provocation because, cable news at any rate is a business. They're trying to make a profit. And I think people forget that. So it's really on the consumer to do the research, to see what both sides are saying. Because otherwise, in cable, they're going to assume you're going to change the channel for something more entertaining. So they're trying to keep your attention.
I would say that first off, I think yes, everybody in the media is biased because we're people, right? Like, so our experiences inform who we are and what decisions we make. No, we are not artificial intelligence, right? Like, so yes, you see artificial intelligence out there starting to write stories and whatnot, and that is a serious threat to the business. But I think the average person out there can tell if a story's been written by AI or if it's been written by a person. And as such, because we are people, our personal experiences, whether they're our beliefs, our history, people that we know, things that we've done over the course of our lives, inform the decisions that we make. And as a journalist, I've been a journalist for over a decade now. I started at Daily Caller working for Tucker Carlson, then later moved over to Breitbart. I've been at Breitbart for a little over 11 years now. And every story we cover, we're making a decision. Should we cover this? Should we cover that? Should we cover this? And as are people in any other newsroom, right? The New York Times makes similar decisions. The Washington Post makes similar decisions. The difference between a Breitbart and maybe some of those more traditional establishment media outlets is we come right out and tell you what it is that we believe. I mean, you know what you're getting when you're dealing with Breitbart. You know that you're dealing with a conservative media outlet. You know that you're dealing with people that have certain viewpoints on the issues of, say, immigration or trade or any other political matter like that. And I believe that honesty helps us build credibility with our audience. I wish that more other media outlets would be open about those biases. I don't think that they maliciously across the media you have their bias intentionally put into stories, but it's the fact of human nature. We our experiences inform our decision-making process, and sometimes that goes down to which stories we cover, who we interview, who we don't interview, which quotes we use, which quotes we don't use, story selection is probably the biggest place where you see the bias play out, and frankly, some of the biggest storylines over the last decade are the ones where we make our bones, where Breitbart separates ourselves from the rest of the media. Places like the rise of Donald Trump is a really good example of this. A lot of the rest of the media laughed him off. We didn't, and we were right. He won the election in 2016. They were wrong. There are plenty of other smaller examples than that. That's the President of the United States, but I think that across the media, if people were just a little bit more humble and a little bit more open with their audiences about what it is that informs their decision-making process, we'd be in a lot better world.
Mitch, before, if I may interrupt you.
As you are prone to do.
You know most every elected official in Nevada and interviewed in some shape or form, held debates, and probably, I would say, one of the most thoughtful journalists in Nevada. I call Mitch frequently and go, I just read this or saw this, and tell me if this is real. So, Mitch, tell me, is this real, or is the media biased?
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank Mary Beth Seawald. This is a fantastic event, probably the best one ever, so congratulations, you and your team are fantastic. Also, I'd like to recognize that guy, Congressman John Porter. I knew him when he wasn't John Porter, actually. That assassination, that attempt that he just mentioned, he was an eyewitness there and saw it firsthand.
1887 with Mitch.
So he was here then. So if you ever have his tour of the Capitol where he shows the bullet holes from the Civil War, he saw that too. So, but he's really kind of like the father of the fly-in concept. So can I call you Father Fly-In from now on? Is that okay? So I'll get it out of the way. I just wanted to get it out of the way.
Thanks, Mitch.
So yeah, thank you for inviting me. It's a terrific event. Yes, of course there's biases. I agree with the rest of the panelists. The issue here is for a real journalist to recognize that you have a bias, but provide balance. So it's that bias with balance that we try to achieve. And I want to give some kudos to local news, to local journalists, to the affiliate stations that are struggling with revenue right now, but they make a go of it. So I want to encourage you when you're home, wherever you come from, most of you are from Las Vegas, to tune into local television and even local radio, and you'll find out that news anchor and that reporter that maybe lives in your neighborhood and really doesn't have an agenda, and they're trying to do the best that they can. They get maybe 6 stories to cover in a day, and sometimes they're the photographer as well, and the photographer serves as the reporter because resources are strained. They're out there covering business, covering economics, trying to get every name pronounced correctly, and many times they do screw up. But they're putting their best foot forward. So, in this, and Congressman once told me, he says, I said, how do you keep up with everything? Because it's like a fire hose, right? There's Breitbart, and there's Drudge, and then there's the NBC Nightly News, and there's your local news, and there's Washington Post, and New York. So there's so many things going on. I would rather have the fire hose than have you go because you're conservative and watch Fox or Newsmax all day, or that you're a liberal and you're just going to stick with MSNBC all day, because it's just an echo chamber, and you're just reinforcing your own preconceived values and political views, and you're not doing anybody any good, especially yourself. So yeah, I have a political bias, but what I tend to do is I turn on folks that I don't normally listen to or watch, and I say, you know what, they have a viewpoint. I need to listen in on this, particularly on this particular issue or that particular issue. So it's tough sometimes, because you think that guy's an idiot. He doesn't even belong on the airwaves, much less me listening to him. But it's important to have all these voices out in that political landscape, out in the political discourse, and that's what's great about this country. I know Congressman is probably the most patriotic person here, and he recognizes, because when he was in office, I did about 3 of his debates. He had really tight races. He had a really tight district, and that district is still really tight. And he's right. I mean, this polarization and this venom does go back to Jefferson and Adams. But even in his races, in his campaigns, there was blood spilled. And let me tell you a story. So probably the tightest, most acrimonious race I've ever witnessed is between John Porter and Dina Titus. And now they're best friends, right? They're just like, they just get along great. So I give them credit for that, from moving on, because in this business, if you can't move on from that, you don't belong in this business. You really don't. You have to have such a thick skin to get by. And so I'm just kind of rambling on, but I want to thank you for having me, and I just want to encourage you, open up your ears, open up your eyes to the myriad of news sources that you have, and then you know what? Turn it off, engage with your family, engage with your friends, and get a life.
Thank you, Mitch.
Just to echo what he said anecdotally, he's exactly right. If you're, you have to grow sort of a thicker skin, I think, in Washington. But I do find anecdotally, I'm from Pennsylvania, from Northeast Pennsylvania, and there are people who will, tell my parents or their friends and be like, I can't believe I saw Michael on Fox, or I can't believe, like I had roommates that were Republicans, or I was dating Republicans. In DC, that's just normal, and I think there is sort of a misperception out there that now it used to be different. I think there used to be more civility, but there is still a big part of Washington that does work together, or that you would be surprised to see Kevin McCarthy at the state dinner introducing his mother to Hunter Biden, who he now is like trying to throw in jail or something like that. But like, you would be surprised how I would say hyper-partisan the New York media establishment is, much more than Congress and DC actually is. We actually do work together still.
Thank you, and Mitch, thanks for taking all our material in your answer. Thank you very much. Thank you, Michael. To all the elected officials here, I know that, not unlike myself, you probably wake up every morning and you don't necessarily always run to the print news because it's not normally there, but every morning I try to track everything I can: CNN, MSNBC, Fox, Breitbart, certainly the RJ, the Sun, the Reno Gazette-Journal. So to all the elected officials here, things have changed. I used to rush to see the paper. Now you have to rush to see within 5 minutes. But the challenge of tracking that news is at 6 a.m. DC time, or 5:30, or whenever we're tracking it. It all changes by 9 o'clock. So to our panel, again, we appreciate you being here. Do you find that people are turning to news that they want to hear, that echo chamber? I mean, Kristen's here, and one time we were talking about buying something to cover a garbage can. Well, it shows up on my phone from Amazon. You can buy a garbage can. I mean, so it was listening. But do you find people are turning through algorithm and all these things to sources that they hear what they want to hear?
Yes and no. So I would say, we have a core audience. I mean, obviously Breitbart is a conservative outlet, right? We have a core audience that regularly comes to us, but there are also many times when we'll break a story and it will take off across the entire media. There's plenty of examples of that recently. Just a few weeks ago, I interviewed President Trump on camera for just about an hour, and several of the pieces from that, of the videos, I mean, CNN was carrying it, MSNBC carried part of our video, Fox News carried part of it, Newsmax, I mean, I kind of ran the gamut on that one. It got picked up in the New York Times and Washington Post, among other places. So there are examples where a conservative media outlet like a Breitbart can take a story, break it, and it goes big a number of different places. I mean, the Trump interview is just one example of it. And then there are people, I regularly hear from reporters across the establishment media. I talk to many of them, people that work at, again, many of those places I just mentioned and other ones that regularly read Breitbart because they want to see what we're saying about different things. They want to see our stories. So it does happen. So yes and no. There's a little bit of a little bit of both. So I do think that stuff is starting to get out there a little bit more. And the closer you get to an election, the easier that becomes, I think. But it's a little more complicated than like, okay, these are the right-wing people and those are the left-wing people, and nobody interacts with anybody else.
If I may follow up, and then for the rest of the panel as well, it seems like we don't have a choice of information because it's being fed to us all the time from the different sources that we may have looked at one time, at J.C. Penney's for something. But it's being pushed, right? Your messages?
I mean, I would argue you've got multiple choices out there, right? Like, so you can choose to read Breitbart, you can choose to read the New York Times, you can choose to watch Fox News, you can choose to watch Newsmax, you can choose to watch MSNBC, you can choose to watch CNN. I mean, there's plenty of different choices, and local news too. I mean, frankly, local news is some of the best stuff that there is out there. We regularly are watching local news for stories that are interesting and that are taking off, and we'll find we have a whole unit at Breitbart. It's called our pre-viral unit, where there's a team of reporters and editors dedicated to tracking local stories that from local news outlets around the country before they go viral. And we're trying to identify different stories and then jump on them and do our own version of it before they take off, and then we get a whole ton of traffic off of that. So we can see what's going to, we have a whole unit that's there testing, seeing what is taking off and what isn't across social media traffic-wise. And so what they'll do is they'll see a story, like a Florida man traps alligator in a trash can or something, right? Like, and that story, if we get on it before a lot of other national media outlets and we do our own version of it, it will get us a lot of traffic, which then helps the business across the board.
Yeah, let me comment on something that my colleague here said and touched upon, and that is the diversification of news publication. What do I mean by that? Well, you explained to me before, we're on the radio. We've got podcasts. All my radio DJs back in Nevada, they've got podcasts, and the RJ has got its own video newscast. So it's no longer this over-the-air, traditional NBC Nightly News over here, and local news is in this basket, and then all of a sudden we've got Breitbart and Drudge over here. It's just this mix, and I think that's probably what maybe Congressman is touching upon. Sometimes it's confusing to cut through all that and find out, I need to watch this, or I need to be informed about that. And that's really the trick, is to cut through that, because you can't listen to everything, and you can't read everything. It's impossible. Like I said before, get a life. I mean, I find myself kind of mesmerized by it sometimes and obsessed by it, but I have to pull back and say, no, wait a minute, take a breather, go out and play your third game of pickleball today, and then just try to come back and assemble it all. Because it's so incumbent upon us just not to watch and just not to listen, right? But to process. Because I think we put so much onus on the distributors of this content. Well, I just saw Hannity say so-and-so. Well, how did you process that? How did you put that in context, right? Because even with local news and any kind of news, most people are going to see it on YouTube. YouTube is this behemoth that, this is the biggest online phenomenon we've ever seen. And you can argue the whole thing that this is like a monopoly now, and YouTube is a monopoly, and I think it's being adjudicated now. So whatever happens on your traditional news sources, then all of a sudden it gets distilled and rebroadcast again in very bite-sized portions, out of context a lot of times, on YouTube and Facebook and things. So it is a scary world out there, but that's one of those things that you really have to say, how does this impact me, right? And how does this impact my neighborhood? Always localize it. So I'll say one more thing and then I'll pass it back to Congressman, and that's why local news is so important. It's done a lot of that work for you. It's going to tell you about what's going on the I-11 issue. It's going to tell you how businesses are being impacted by the state legislature, which we need to give kudos to all the state lawmakers, if you're an assembly person or a state senator, because guess what? You finished up, you got bills signed, you passed the budget, you had, people on the far right and the far left, but you did the work of the people. So you need to, Tracy, you need to give yourself a round of applause. You did a great job the last session. There you go. So where's the round of applause?
So while we're on the echo chamber, I look around the room, as you know, as business leaders, political leaders, government agency leaders, you're like 30 seconds away from having a story written about you because it can be pushed within moments. It can be around the world within moments. The political parties, bless them, they have banks of people. Sorry, I'm not picking on the banks today. There are dozens of people sitting in these political party offices that are tracking everything that's said across the country. And now with technology, they're able to do that. They track it, and then guess what? They push it to these folks, hoping to get a bite, hoping to get a headline. But you know, Carlos, I'll pick on gaming for a second. You know the rules. Gaming is one of the most regulated organizations and companies, corporations in the world. They cannot use predatory practices, but the media can. So as all these political parties are sending you, so-and-so said this or so-and-so tripped going down the stairs, how do you determine then what are those stories that if you get 200 a day from the Democrats, 200 a day from the Republicans, how do you decide? Is this something that you test to see what has legs?
Well, I mean, I would just say you have to use your best judgment. You have to apply common sense to different things. I mean, yeah, you're right. That happens every day, all day, every day. I mean, just yesterday, I probably got 100 calls and texts and stuff from different people and the different campaigns. It definitely intensifies around an election. So right now we've got a Republican primary, or kind of, I guess. There's several other people running, but I mean, I think it's pretty clear who's going to be the Republican nominee based off the polls. But the point is that all the other campaigns are pitching stories nonstop, right? Like, and so you have to, sometimes you say yes, sometimes you say no. It's kind of a judgment call in those moments. Like, is this a legitimate story? Is that a legitimate thing? There are plenty of times, by the way, when Republicans will pitch me stories about the Bidens, and I'll say no, and I'll say that I don't think that's a fair hit. Or there are plenty of times when the other way around. I talked to a lot of people on the Democrat side, and they'll pitch a story about a Republican, and it's a legit story, and we'll do it. So it's kind of a judgment call. It depends. Is it legit or is it not?
Yeah, I mean, when I was a producer, we would go through. I mean, hot mic moments were our favorite thing in the world. Romney and the 47%. It was gold. It was TV gold for us. I think we beat Fox for the first time with something like that. The George Allen macaca moment, I think, stands out to me the most. But you also have to be. Not to pick on them, but you have to be careful. Fox has shelled out a lot of money, a lot of settlements for peddling conspiracy theories that were very half-baked and that they didn't do their due diligence and did not meet either ethical standards or legal standards. And they've been forced. I mean, this is not even Dominion aside, but I mean, the Seth Rich conspiracy theory, they were so scared to put their talent on the stand, they settled for millions and millions of dollars because they knew their talent was either going to perjure themselves or they were going to be, admit to lying on air intentionally. So it comes at a cost. Lies are expensive for these media corporations, and I think Fox found that out the hard way, and you start to see it now. You start to see, I watch Fox every morning, especially every weekend mornings. I love Fox and Friends, but you can actually see them caveating stories. Joe Biden was the winner. It's hard to believe they have to do that, but they had to pay a very heavy price for it.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, real quickly, the echo chamber is very, very real. Rupert Murdoch controls Fox with an iron fist. And when you tune that in, you know what you're going to get. And it's the same thing with MSNBC. MSNBC ratings have gone up, actually, covering just Trump for indictments, what's going on in the courtroom. And Rachel Maddow is practically the king in certain demos of cable news. CNN hasn't found its way. CNN is still floundering in the ratings game. They're just trying to report straight news now. Some of you probably perceive a bias there, but their ratings have floundered. So what does that mean? That means that echo chamber is real and it's being reflected in the numbers, right? So there's that aspect of it, and then someone else talked about the conspiracy theories that are still floating around, right? I mean, I wrote some of this down. Everyone's heard of Alex Jones, right? He lost to the Sandy Hook victims, sued him. He hasn't paid a dime of that $1.5 billion that he owes them, by the way. And he's the one that said that Sandy Hook was staged, that shooting was staged, and chemicals in the water are turning frogs gay, among certain other things. And so people will just go ahead and listen to that and watch that and then just eat it up. To a certain extent, and I'll end with this, Trump, when you listen to him and watch him, you just think he's telling the truth because he's so emphatic and he's so assertive about it. You just believe that what he's saying, he's got those statistics somewhere. You have to believe what he's saying, and most of it is lies. So that's why I say discerning listener, discerning viewer, cut through that crap and process that news with a fine-tooth comb.
It's called a balanced diet of news.
Balanced diet, well said. I look at what's happening on a daily basis, not only from the media perspective, but the business side, which I want to talk about here in a moment. But I want to share with the audience kind of how this works in political campaigns. The viewership of Fox, I don't know, what, 1 million people, whatever it is, CNN, 800,000. I'm off on numbers, you guys will know the numbers. But here's how it works in Washington and nationally. You can take a story that showed on CNN and blast it to 300 million people. The platforms of the cable news, and again, this is John speaking, not the chamber, and Mary Beth, as a professional, I know you understand the media probably better than anybody in here. That 10 seconds of a clip on Fox, whatever you're saying, or that 10 seconds on MSNBC or whatever, that is pushed millions of times. They don't care, elected officials as a rule, don't care about the million people that are watching Fox or CNN. They want that 30-second clip, and then they push it into campaigns and repeat it over and over again. So on that subject, let's talk about the business side. Is a reporter, a journalist, a professional, are they judged by the large headlines they get, or how does it work?
I guess I'll start real quick.
Yeah.
My business is kind of interesting, right? Because we have this friendly tension between folks that like Cox and DirecTV and Dish that provide local television to many people. And then we also have that notion of cord cutting, where people that go ahead and subscribe to these premium services, it's gone down from perhaps 3/4 of the population to just about half right now. So that impacts our business somewhat adversely. On the other hand, more people, it cracks me up when I saw this statistic, are plugging in old-fashioned antennas to their flat-screen TVs, recognizing that they can get free, everybody loves free over-the-air HD television, and they can get about 50 stations in their own market. And that's growing. And we only have about 15% of Americans now that get their TV that way. Latinos over-index about at 25%, and certain other demos do as well, but it's growing. Gen Xers love that, 9% growth in that demographic. So we're seeing that, and that's very gratifying for us. But the bottom line is it's still a struggle from a business standpoint. I don't think reporters, when they go out in the field, think, well, this story is gonna make my sales department happy. I see a bifurcation in all the stations that I see in radio and television where there is that line. I know maybe some folks don't believe it, but they're going to go after that story on that sponsor if they have to. That's one of the things that I got into when I was at Vegas PBS Channel 10, right? We're licensed to the Clark County School District. And I remember one time there was a superintendent, remain nameless, he went on another radio station and said the N-word. And I went to the general manager at the time, and I said, we got to talk about this on Nevada Week in Review. And he said, go for it. And of course, the superintendent is his boss, technically. And we went for it. And I really commended him for that. The general manager at the time was Tom Axtell. So there has to be that division between the sales department. I don't care if it's online or anything else. And I'm a purist when it comes to journalism. It's so important to have that wall. And it's not an invisible wall. It's got to be a block wall. It's got to be an iron curtain between the sales department, the revenue generating instruments that are so important to the overall wealth and health of that particular media company, and the news department itself. And I'm very proud of our local radio and television journalists. They've kept that line.
Yeah.
So what about EVs and AM radio and FM? Should we talk about that later?
I could do that.
No, we'll save that one.
I would just say that regarding that iron curtain, it's important. You can't let business side decisions affect editorial decisions. They have to be independent. We have that line here. It is extremely important. The way that in the case of Breitbart, I mean, it's ad revenue. We also have a partnership with SiriusXM, so we do 7 days a week, 3-hour a day show on SiriusXM Patriot Channel. I host our Saturday morning show. So if anybody wants to listen, it's 10 to 1 Eastern on Saturday. I've had on a lot of different people from Nevada, different candidates. I had on your governor, Joe Lombardo, back when he was a candidate for governor multiple times, and lots of different other people. This weekend I had Speaker McCarthy, but the line that you need to have that line between so the way a reporter's judged is not like it's kind of traffic to an extent. Yes, if a story gets a lot of attention out there, that's a good thing. They're also but there's other metrics. So there are some like subjective, and then there are some like objective metrics. So you're looking at are they keeping up with enough stories? Are they on top of their beat? Are they covering stuff in depth enough? But also, I mean, there are plenty of stories that will, take off and go viral and or get a lot of attention out there or get a lot of earned media beyond our site. So there's kind of that stuff, and it's a little bit of both. So it's, some of it's, a straight up subjective or objective like metric or traffic numbers. Some of it's or social media interactions. We regularly on our Facebook page will beat the New York Times or the Washington Post in terms of interactions. And I think last week we beat them both combined, or it might have been the week before that. So there's that, but there's also, there's subjective metrics as well. Like, are they breaking big stories? Are they talking to important people? Are they on top of issues that matter? So it's a little bit of both.
Michael, your experience, CNN, MSNBC, of course, working in the White House, you have to have seen it all.
Yeah, so I was a producer, and then I was in politics, and now I'm commenting on politics. As a commentator, I've really tried to take a clinical approach because I'm older in my career. I like politics as a political junkie, and I did my partisan time, and I, as much affection as I have for the president and first lady and my colleagues, I view politics through the lens of a political junkie, and I like to call balls and strikes. And I think it's more fun that way. I think it's a more fun conversation than just being knee-jerk, spitting out DNC talking points. I think it's more authentic for me to just take current events and analyze them based on my experience and perspective. Now, to the original question, it's one of the reasons why I decided to leave cable, I think, was because there is this debate over whether, journalists, I'm using cable because that's my experience in cable news.
And we like Cox, please. To our friends at Cox Communications, so please. Whether cable is a business or whether it's journalism and news. And
it was kind of this, what I would call the sugar or veggies debate. Should the executives at networks, should they be determining what the public gets to see and hear, or should we just give them what they want? At MSNBC, they want Trump. They want to see Trump. They want to cut, the audience is dying for more and more and more indictments. On Fox, they like to cover the president's son, and that works for them. People apparently, that works for them. But it is a debate, and I think it goes back to story placement. And there'll be times I look at the lead on MSNBC, and it's completely different for 30 minutes on Fox. And you have to wonder, what are they seeing that their viewers want that is so different than the other network? No one's right or wrong. It's just different. And I do think Fox's audience is demographically older. It's demographically whiter, less diverse, and it is monolithic. And so they have this power that is not going anywhere because their audience is with them no matter what. Whereas the other two are skew a little younger, skew a little bit more liberal, and progressives are really finding their news in so many, especially young progressives, don't watch cable news. They don't watch nightly news. They're listening to podcasts. They're getting their news through YouTube shows. So there is the two, Fox does have a different sort of audience loyalty than the other two cable news networks do, but I still think that there is a debate, and that's why I think a balanced diet is important. If I'm getting one point of view from Rachel Maddow, I want to know what she's leaving out. I want to know what she's not talking about. Doesn't mean I go to Fox. It just means I do my own sourcing, whether it's the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, or the Associated Press, sources that I trust. That's how I kind of develop my own opinions.
So many of you, if not all of you, have been in the congressional office, and you'll note when the door opens, it's time for the congressman to conclude his meeting. Rachel's in the back and has opened the door. I understand that I'm running out of time, but I just want to make a couple comments and then one additional question. So I was talking to Michael outside because we were getting to know each other, and I showed her last night when I got home, Tina from your party, I got home and I turned on the news and I was watching CNN because I, like the most here, we watch everything. And the headline was, back up. The Senate decided to change the dress code in the U.S. Senate, where now you can dress down more than you could in the past. And I know part of that is based upon the members at the time. But this is a classic. I turn on the television, the headline is, Conservatives bash Democrats over dress code in the U.S. Senate. Oh yeah, they didn't use bash, but they used something similar. But then the two folks that were being interviewed were very progressive Democrats that didn't like the new dress code. And I'm going, schizophrenia here. Headline says conservatives are bashing and then the Democrats. So that really is an example. But in conclusion, should there be more regulation for the media?
Regulation for?
The media. For the media.
For media?
Accountability, ethics, but should there be more regulation of the media? And what does that mean?
Well, we're already highly regulated. We have to, all of my stations are licensed by the Federal Communications Commission, unlike anybody else, unlike print, unlike online, digital, whatever. And we have to keep a political file that's open to the public, and we have to pay enormous regulatory fees every year in order to keep those stations open. So there's our accountability there. So, you can talk about New York Times versus Sullivan all you want, and I think that's a wonderful decision. The absence of malice, you've heard that movie, but they actually, newspapers have a lot of leeway. We do not. So we have accountability already with a government agency. And I'll say one other thing about local news. I'm their biggest cheerleader. I was interviewed by Vegas PBS. That was kind of my home for many, many years. I interviewed the congressman there many times, had 100 debates, did the last Harry Reid debate with Sharon Engel with her famous line, "Man up, Harry Reid," and he actually came up to me one time when I visited him in Washington, D.C. He said, "I really did bad on that debate, didn't I?" And I wanted to say, "Yeah, you really did," but you really didn't say that to Harry Reid, because he pulled one of the famous Harry Reid walkaways and just leave you in the dust. But I was really proud of what we did at Vegas PBS and what public television does across the nation, right? So what is that? Well, how about watching BBC News? How about getting out of this shell, this almost like a cone of silence? Get smart, I know I'm showing my age, here in Washington, D.C., where it's so insulated. There's an echo chamber, ideological echo chamber. So conservatives listen and watch conservative, liberals watch, but there's also an echo chamber for people that are here on the Hill, that they think the whole world revolves around what takes place in the House of Representatives and the Senate. To a certain extent it does, but there's neighborhoods and communities and people and taking their kids to soccer games, and they're at the school board meeting because whatever they're teaching they don't like, and so there's all these voices out there, and I guess it just gets back to the fact that be careful about what you watch, be careful about what you listen to, localize it as much as possible, and you'll come out ahead.
Yeah.
So I've been given the hook now by Paul, so we're going to conclude. I want to say thank you, Michael, Matt, Mitch, for your time, your candor. I know they're going to be around a little bit this morning. Please don't hesitate to ask any question. I just want to leave you quickly. One of my final days in Congress, a reporter from Nevada called me and said, "I heard you stole your credenza from your office." So someday I'll tell you that story. So anyway, have a good time. Welcome, everybody. Appreciate it. Thank you very much.